You've probably tried budgeting at least once in your life. Maybe you downloaded the app, color-coded the spreadsheet, or wrote everything down in a notebook. And then, somewhere between week 2 and week 3, it completely fell apart. Here's the uncomfortable truth. It wasn't a willpower problem. The budget itself was broken from the start. Let's talk about why traditional budgeting has such a catastrophic failure rate. Studies from the National Endowment for Financial Education have consistently shown that a significant portion of Americans who create budgets abandon them within the first few months. But why? The most common culprit is what behavioral economists call decision fatigue. When a budget forces you to make dozens of tiny spending decisions every single day. Is this coffee okay? Can I afford this lunch? You eventually run out of mental energy to keep tracking. The system collapses under its own weight. The second killer is rigidity. Most people build budgets around a perfect month. A month where nothing unexpected happens. But life is not a perfect month. The car needs a repair. A birthday comes up. Your electricity bill spikes in the summer. A budget that has no room for real life will be abandoned the moment real life shows up. And the third reason is perhaps the most psychological: guilt. Traditional line item budgets turn every small purchase into a moral referendum. You spend $4 on a coffee and suddenly you feel like you've failed the entire system. That guilt becomes associated with the act of budgeting itself, so people stop doing it altogether just to escape the bad feeling. The budget didn't fail because you were undisciplined. It failed because it was designed in a way that made failure almost inevitable. For most of human history, budgeting wasn't a personal responsibility. It was a survival mechanism handled at the household or community level. You grew food, you stored what you could, and you consumed the rest. There was no spreadsheet because resources were tangible and visible. The modern personal budget as we know it really emerged in the 20th century alongside the rise of consumer credit and the paycheck economy. Suddenly, money became abstract. You earned numbers on paper, spent numbers on a card, and owed numbers to a bank. That abstraction created a gap between earning and spending that had never really existed before at such scale. Financial advisors and institutions tried to fill that gap with increasingly complex budgeting systems: envelope methods, zero-based budgeting, cash flow tracking, each one more detailed than the last. And while these systems work beautifully for certain personality types, particularly those who genuinely enjoy detailed record-keeping, they were fundamentally inaccessible to the average person who just wanted to stop feeling broke all the time. What the personal finance world needed wasn't a more complicated system. It needed a simpler one. And that's exactly what percentage-based budgeting offers. The percentage-based framework most commonly associated with modern personal finance is the 50-30-20 rule, which was popularized by Harvard bankruptcy law professor Elizabeth Warren and her daughter Amelia Warren Tyagi in their 2005 book, All Your Worth. The core idea is elegantly simple. Instead of tracking every dollar by category, you divide your after-tax income into 3 broad buckets based on percentages. 50% goes toward needs, the non-negotiable expenses that keep your life functioning. We're talking housing, utilities, groceries, basic transportation, insurance, and minimum debt payments. These are the things that would cause serious consequences if they went unpaid. 30% goes toward wants, the spending that makes life enjoyable rather than merely survivable. Dining out, entertainment subscriptions, hobbies, travel, and yes, that daily coffee. This category is not frivolous. Research in positive psychology consistently links discretionary spending on experiences and small pleasures to overall life satisfaction. The key is that it's bounded. It has a ceiling, and the final 20% goes toward financial goals, saving for emergencies, contributing to retirement accounts, paying down debt beyond the minimum, or building toward a major purchase. This 20% is the part that most line item budgets neglect because it gets squeezed out by the detail of everything else. The brilliance of this framework is what it removes: the daily decision-making. You're not asking, "Can I afford this?" every moment. You're asking one question at the beginning of the month: do my spending patterns fit within these 3 broad buckets? That's a fundamentally different and far less exhausting relationship with your own money. From a behavioral science perspective, the 50-30-20 rule succeeds where rigid budgets fail for several specific reasons. First, it operates on what psychologists call satisficing rather than optimizing. Optimizing, trying to make the absolute best possible decision with every dollar, is mentally exhausting and statistically unlikely to produce better long-term outcomes than simply having a reasonable system and sticking to it. Satisficing means finding a solution that is good enough and sustainable. A budget you follow imperfectly for 10 years will produce dramatically better financial outcomes than a perfect budget you abandon after 3 weeks. Second, the broad categories create what researchers call psychological slack. When your wants category has room in it, a spontaneous dinner with friends doesn't feel like a budget-breaking catastrophe. It's already accounted for. That slack is not a design flaw. It's the feature that makes the system survivable. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the framework separates self-care from guilt. By explicitly building in a 30% wants allocation, the system acknowledges that enjoying your life is not the enemy of financial health. Historical patterns in financial psychology show that people who feel chronically deprived by their financial systems are far more likely to engage in screw-it spending, large impulsive purchases that blow up any savings progress entirely. Giving yourself permission to spend on things you enjoy, within a defined boundary, actually protects your long-term financial behavior. It's the same principle behind why strict fad diets fail at higher rates than balanced eating approaches. Deprivation isn't a strategy. It's a countdown to collapse. Understanding the mechanics of the 50-30-20 rule is one thing. Applying it to a real life with real numbers requires a few important considerations. The starting point is always your after-tax income, not your gross salary. What matters is the money that actually lands in your account each month, because that is what you actually have to work with. From there, the honest exercise is to look at your last 2 to 3 months of actual spending, not what you wish you spent, but what you actually did spend, and sort those expenses into the 3 categories. Most people discover one of a few common patterns. Either their needs category is well above 50%, often because of high housing costs in expensive cities, which is a structural challenge that requires bigger picture decisions about living situation or income. Or their wants are dramatically outpacing their needs, which points to lifestyle inflation, the well-documented tendency for spending to automatically expand to match rising income without any conscious choice. Or the 20% savings goal is simply missing entirely, because it never got automated and so it got spent. The most consistent advice from financial educators and behavioral researchers is to automate the savings and investment portion first, before discretionary spending can absorb it. This approach, sometimes called paying yourself first, is one of the most robustly supported habits in personal finance research across decades of data. The percentages themselves are also not sacred. Someone with very high fixed costs might run a 60-20-20 split. Someone aggressively eliminating debt might shift to 50-20-30 with the larger slice directed at repayment. The specific numbers matter less than the core principle. Divide intentionally, automate where possible, and build in room for real life. Most budgets don't fail because of a character flaw in the person who made them. They fail because they were built on a model that ignored human psychology, demanded perfection, and made everyday life feel like a series of financial crimes. The 50-30-20 framework, and percentage-based budgeting more broadly, works not because it is complicated, but because it respects the reality of how people actually make decisions under the ordinary pressures of ordinary life. It gives structure without suffocation, boundaries without guilt, and a savings habit without requiring you to become a different person overnight. Understanding why a system works is often more valuable than the system itself, because when you understand the why, you can adapt the tool to fit your circumstances rather than abandoning it the moment your circumstances don't fit the tool. If this kind of exploration into the mechanics and psychology behind everyday financial concepts is useful to you, consider subscribing to the channel. There's a lot more where this came from, and if you know someone who has tried budgeting and given up, this might be exactly the video they need to see.